Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today we're sitting down with a brand new guest to explore some brand new things. His name is Justin Scoggins, and he has written a book called Inking Christ, a theological approach to tattoos. And so, Justin, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have time with you.
It's great to be here, man. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend it with me.
Absolutely, absolutely. No place I'd rather be than right here. So this is your first time here, and I thought maybe since this is your first time, we could have you just introduce yourself because nobody knows you better than you do. Sometimes I introduce the person, but I figured that, you know what? Justin knows Justin better than I do. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you
I feel
do?
I feel like my wife knows me better than I do.
Maybe bring her on. She could tell
Yeah,
us who you are.
she's
She'll tell
busy.
us the facts.
So I'm Justin, obviously. I wrote this book. It was a part of my doctoral dissertation. Actually, it was my doctoral dissertation, and I work in a day center doing ministry here called the Mission of Winter Haven. We help primarily homeless individuals or at-risk individuals, those with food insecurities, things of that nature. That's been my full-time job for the last 5 years, going on 6 years. And then I also am an associate pastor at a local church here as well. I got three kids who wear me out every single day, age 2, 4, and 7.
Oh, wow.
My wife is art professor at the local state college, and a master painter herself. Um, yeah, so that's us. I'm from North Carolina, Western North Carolina, and I miss the seasons and the mountains, but God has me here right now, and I'm gonna enjoy it and be blessed where I am.
There
So
you go.
that's a
Seven,
little about me.
I have one 7-year-old. That's the only child we have, and I can barely keep up. So I don't know how you do two, 4, and
They're
7.
not dead yet. So
Right.
we're that's like my litmus test of
It's like
parenting. Have
everyone's
they
still
died?
alive and breathing.
No, they haven't. They're alive. We're good. Awesome.
That's awesome. So what do you do as a associate pastor? Because I mean, I used to be a pastor of a church, and I've
Yeah.
had other people on the show who have been assistant pastors, associate pastors, and everybody's role seems to be a little bit different in that place. So, like, what do you do as an associate pastor?
Well, the role of associate pastor, yeah, I mean, from my perspective, is just pretty simple. You know, I assist the lead pastor in duties of the church, whether that's visiting people, calling people.
Hmm.
I run our young adults, so ages, college to 35-ish,
Hmm.
whoever feels like they're young enough to be a part of it. You speak some Sundays. I'll run a Wednesday night class.
Okay.
I just pretty much help out, which is where I like to be.
Kind of fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
Awesome. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your spiritual journey, and I think this will probably lead us into the book. But I was wondering if you could share like a little bit about your journey, like with God and spiritual things. Like how were you raised? You know, like what did religion look like for you in your home when you were a kid? Maybe a
Yeah.
little bit about where you are now, some of the highs, lows, and betweens that brought you from there to here.
Okay. Yeah. So I was raised again, Western North Carolina.
Hmm.
My mom and my dad divorced when I was 9, I believe. So we moved in with my grandmother to Western North Carolina. So it was like a biblical mandate for her that we have to be in church on Sundays. So we went to church. I never really liked it. It just wasn't my thing, right? It just wasn't something I necessarily cared about. I
Yeah.
didn't make meaningful relationships,
Hmm.
and there was that obvious I don't know if it was judgment, yeah, from coming from a single family home that you get. And then I was also like a feral child, right? Like I was just wild. And it had nothing to do with a lack of a father in the home. I was just an idiot, right? Like
Yes.
I made my own dumb choices.
Yep.
But as I grew up, like I started to realize like church just isn't for me. It's just not my thing. And it's not a knock on the church. I don't believe they necessarily did anything wrong. There were some things that didn't line up, with what I was reading in scripture versus what
Sure.
was being preached, of course. But you're going to find that wherever you go. It just wasn't, it didn't matter to me. Like
Mm.
that was just apathetic, and that led me to agnosticism and atheism in my late teens, early 20s. And I would teeter on either of those depending on who you
Hmm.
asked, on what day you asked. And then there was a moment when I was 25. I'd been going just studying David Hume and Nietzsche, and really got like obsessed with this idea of nihilism, which eventually just leads ultimately to fatalism,
Mm,
and then nothing matters.
mm,
So once I realized that nothing mattered, uh, I was at the end of my life pretty much, and going to, you know, take care of myself in that way. But I also knew like if there was any person to call out to, it would be Jesus, because I'd studied different religions, and it was the only one who's gotten knelt to answer creation.
yeah.
Um, so in the moment of literally finger on the trigger, I cried out to him, and
Mm,
he met me in an experience that I can't run away from.
mm,
I've tried to rationalize myself out of it for the last 12 years, because being a Christian's a lot harder than it looks. And I can't do that. So ever since then, I've just followed Jesus. So I
mm,
quit drugs. I quit hanging out with people that I hung out with that were bad influences at the time. I went and bought a Bible. I went through this whole educational process just to get closer to knowing the God that I loved, that loved me enough to save me in my darkest moment. Um, and I think that's kind of the story of my own personal ministry, is that
mm,
I really just enjoy being with people in the darkest parts of their lives,
mm,
because that's where God met me. And it's also the incarnation, right? Like it's part of the reason why we do what we're supposed to be doing anyway. We meet people where they are. We shine light in the darkness. Like it's this beautiful story of being with others.
mm.
And yeah, so I started there. I'm here now, and I am just looking forward to the future, whatever door is open for me, man.
What brought you to school? Because you said you got your doctorate, and this book kind of came from that. So what brought
Well,
you into that
like
place?
I hated school, right? Like it was never a thing for me. Like I just never enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I liked sciences in high school, English. I enjoyed that, but school was just, golly, I would rather dig a spoon in my ear, man, than just be at school. So I didn't do that. I got into work, and I was
Hmm.
managing an auto parts stores, and I was going to go and do that whole route. And then we moved down to Florida, and I got the opportunity to be a youth pastor at a church, which did not pay very well, but my wife was making enough to where we could do it, and I could go back to school full time. And
Mm,
I got my BA in public administration, I think. I don't
hmm.
even know really. I just did it. And then I started thinking about ministry and furthering my education. And I built a relationship with Leonard Sweet, and
Hmm.
he encouraged me to go further. And I went further with my master's. And then I was about to graduate, and he was like, "You need to do a doctorate in theology."
Mm.
And I was like, "I don't really want to, but okay, if you
Right.
say
Leonard Sweet
that,
says so.
if they say that, if you say that, and they accept me, I'm not like the smartest dude in the room, so I don't even know if I'll get into this program. Because you have to apply for these things and
Yep.
write stuff out, and I think there's only like a 20 something percent acceptance rate if they're ATS certified,
Hmm.
depending on the school.
Yep.
And I got in, and I was like, okay, well, let's do it.
Yeah.
So I did it and wrote this book as a part of that process, and I've just, and instead of like educating myself to become an imbecile, I've found that the church is actually really quite beautiful and diverse, and
Yeah.
it's way cooler than we've made it out to be. And it's been a pleasant surprise. Like I love the church so much more now.
Yeah.
And as a doctor of theology, right? Like I want to be a healer of those things that segregate and uh, tear us apart, and drive wedges and things of
Yeah.
that nature. So that journey is all Leonard Sweet. Listen to him.
That's really awesome. This book, I mean, and your obviously your dissertation for your for school is obviously a very specific book to write. And I know that having gone for my own demon degree, I know you have to really focus in. They really kind of get you to focus in on one particular topic so you can really drill into it. But this book is not just about art. It's not just about creativity and theology, but it's really about tattoos and how all these things tie into it. So I'm really curious, like why. Obviously, you have a lot of tattoos. I can see when you put your arm up, you have a sleeve there. But why tattoos? Like, why was this such an important thing for you to dig into your dissertation and then to come in and write this book?
Well, I was told I couldn't. That was the first thing. So it was kind of out of spite, right, to begin with.
I love it.
Um, but also like I wasn't, I'm like a spiritual mutt, right? Like I come from different traditions. I take from different traditions.
Mhm.
I love, different traditions for different reasons. And
Yeah.
then when you get into the idea of tattoos, right? Like you put stuff on your skin, like there's something so meaningful about that.
Mhm.
And within that, I feel like Christianity maybe has missed an opportunity to not necessarily appropriate that culture, but join
Mhm.
in that culture and allow the light of Christ to shine.
Mhm.
And tattoos have just always been cool. Like I've loved tattoos since I can remember. It's never been this thing to where I saw somebody with tattoos and I was like, oh, you're a disgusting individual. It's
Right.
like, nah, man, I want to look like that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And again, that's part of me just being like a feral child. But as the more I studied and the more I got into it, it was like, this could actually be very sacramental in nature,
Mhm.
and very spiritual in approach. And it could even be like this thing of discipleship and this new way for the church to make headway into a culture that we've almost abandoned just because we believe it to be taboo.
Yeah.
So when I sat down to pick a topic, it was not only out of spite, but it was this genuine curiosity that I had. Like, can Jesus be with tattoos? Can
Mm.
he be in tattoos? Can I use scripture to defend that? Is there going to be historical precedents for all of that? Is there going to be, you know, philosophical reasoning for tattoos or spiritual justification? Like, is all of this going to be, me just kind of peeing into the wind, right? Like, is it
Right.
is it just going to blow
Yeah.
back on me and I'm going to have to back up and punt and do something different? But what I found out is yes, right?
Yeah.
Like this absolutely can be another arena for the church and for Christians to be a part of and to be with people in,
Mm.
and allow Christ to operate because you're telling a story on your body when you get a tattoo. And why not tell the greatest story ever told?
Yeah. How old were you when you got your first tattoo?
I was 18, man.
18.
Yeah, you
Did you get it
couldn't
like right
go.
after you turned 18? Did you go right to
Yeah,
the,
yeah. I
yeah.
went right there, got two little birds on my arm,
Yeah.
like they're like quarter size. I was the baddest man in the room.
There you go. How
My
many do you, I
little
mean, I know you have like a lot, but how many do you have like in total? How many times have you been to a tattoo parlor, I should say?
I quit counting.
You quit counting.
Yeah, I got a lot.
Yeah.
So I got my buddy Billy in North Carolina. So we've been friends for a long time, and
Hmm.
I wrote about him a little bit in the book, and how that relationship just impacted me. Um, but I'll go see him, and I'll give him some money, and he's like, okay, just sit here all day as long as you can take it,
Yep.
and that's what I'll do.
I love it. All right, so
Yeah.
here's a real life scenario for you. I'd love to know how you would respond to this. This is my little bit of my story, and I've had some people who have tattoos share similar stories with me. So I'd love to hear your response to this. But when I graduated seminary, I went to pastor this small Dutch Reformed church, and I was 26, and the average age in the congregation was like 140. Like just people
Nice.
people very old. Everybody's like my grandparent or my great grandparent. I'm like this kid, and so I went for my interview, and I had tattoos. I still obviously still have tattoos. I had two on my arms. I got one on my ankle and one on my wrist. And as I expected, I figured this was going to happen. I was told that I have to cover up my tattoos when I'm in the pulpit. And so I gave pushback, of course, but I was hammered with Leviticus, which you talk about in the book, and I pushed back on that for obvious reasons. Remember, I said to them, like, do you eat shrimp? And they're like, yes. I'm like, well, Leviticus also says you shouldn't eat shrimp, So I give some context to Leviticus. Then I was hit with the, well, your body's a temple argument, and not everybody's going to agree with the way that you've chosen to adorn your temple. So tattoos covered in the pulpit. So I spent 3 years at the church, and every Sunday I would cover up the tattoo with like a wristband. And there was this one Sunday that I forgot, and within minutes after the service was over, that I had people in my office reminding me that I had to wear this band. And so it was just like a really big thing in the church. So I was wondering, like that said, how do you deal with that mindset that your body is a temple of the Lord and the way that you've chosen to adorn it with ink is not appropriate? I know you talk about this in chapter 2 of the books. You don't have to give us like all the details and pearls of wisdom, but I do know that some of our listeners have had family, they've had church people kind of push back on their tattoos showing when they're out in public in the church area. So I was wondering what your thoughts are about that.
Well, my first question, you always respond with a question, right?
Hmm. Yep.
So whenever they were doing the tabernacle, and God specifically, selected artisans to
Hmm.
decorate and to carve and to do these things. Is the tabernacle less holy because it showed artwork,
Hmm.
or because God directed the creative process to be there? Is it
Hmm.
actually more involved with the image bearing that they have?
Yeah. Hmm.
And just let them think about it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they're going to have to come to a conclusion pretty quick. They're either
Right.
denying scripture, or they're going to have to back up and punt and come from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And the whole idea that your body's a temple, right? Like that it's temples are to be decorated. We live in a church culture, especially in Western church, to where our churches are now like little warehouses
Yeah.
that are built up, and their ceilings are black, and we're all about lights and the big screens.
Yeah.
The church used to have all this stained glass and allow the natural light of the sun as the day went to change the viewer's eye and tell the story. And there was this warmth. We've kind of taken that away.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
using your body as a temple, that's actually more Paul's speaking more explicitly about the things you put in it,
Hmm.
right? The stuff that you put in.
Yeah.
And yeah, ink goes in your skin, but you're also making it something that's aesthetically pleasing, especially for our day and age, right? And one thing I hate that we do is we appropriate the context of a first century document into the current context,
I don't
right?
know
Like,
anybody who does that,
oh
Justin.
my God, I hate it. It's the dumbest thing ever. Like we leave out the whole historical context of
True.
scripture and when it was written and who it was written to. And we're like, well, we're gonna apply this 2,000 years later and it
Yeah.
means the same thing.
Yeah.
It just doesn't.
Yeah.
Like you can't, you're doing a disservice to scripture when you do that, and you're taking away from the beauty of the gospel when you do that. So how I approach situations like that, and honestly, like I'm at a point in my life where I just don't care. You're going to feel some type of way regardless. I'm not going to be able to convince you otherwise.
Yeah.
We also live in a society where confirmation bias is like the top thing. We all want to be
Hmm.
confirmed in our own bias. So I'm not going to convince you otherwise.
Yeah.
But what I can do through relationship and through ministry is hopefully change your mind about how you view it.
Yeah.
And that's where the real work is. Like
Yeah.
I don't have time anymore. I'm tired. Like I said, I've got 3 kids, bro. I'm not arguing with people over
Right.
that.
Just choose my battles and where I'm going to
Yeah.
invest my energy.
It's crazy.
It's so true. Yeah, I learned, I think in that place that I was in back then, like I remember coming to this realization that like I'm never going to be able to convince people who have these kinds of arguments, whether it's about tattoos or whether it's about that I should be preaching about hell or whatever it is I should be, whatever they wanted me to be doing. And I found that I got much further in my conversations if I would ask questions, like you just said,
Mhm.
and just say things like, in that very instance, I remember with the shrimp thing, I said, well, what about, like in this same book that you're coming at me with, and you say I shouldn't be having tattoos because Leviticus is A, B, and C. It also says this about shellfish. It says this about the type of clothing that you're wearing. You shouldn't be
Mhm.
wearing mixed fabrics. Like, we can't just take one of these things because it seems to fit what we want to hear and then just ignore everything else. Like, it doesn't seem like a very appropriate way to use the scriptures. And I would get much further with that kind of a
Yeah.
conversation than just, kind of
Well, and
debating back
that
and
also
forth.
allows you the opportunity to say, look, Leviticus is actually a really beautiful book. It is setting up these guardrails for these people who are going into something completely wild and different.
Yep, yep,
And they're supposed to be the light, all
yep,
right? They're
yep.
supposed to be the ones that are set apart. They're supposed to be the ones that are different. So Leviticus is actually, with all its do's and don'ts, is full of grace and mercy.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you miss the forest for the trees, you're missing the gospel in Leviticus, and you can't do that.
That's right. Can you talk a little bit about the history of tattoos within Christianity? Something that I'm curious to hear more about is like was there ever a time when tattoos were nobody really thought anything about them and people just had tattoos, big deal? Was there a time when kind of the debate came into picture? Like what did that development look like throughout church history?
I think it's mostly a Western thing, like in the 40s, 20s to the
Most
40s, and
things
then the
are
sexual.
Western things.
Yeah. Because the church has been getting tattooed since the earliest I found someone write about it was around 350 AD,
Mm,
Ethiopian Copts. And I would push to say it was sooner than that,
sure.
but I don't have any evidence for that, so I can't
Hmm.
back that up. Just because, being an ancient Near East religion and how tribes operated around then and how they would mark their bodies. And Ethiopia was one of the first churches, so
Hmm.
they would almost appropriate the culture of that time into Christianity and show these symbols.
Hmm.
Like they were writing on the catacombs and things of that nature. So I
Hmm.
would I would almost push, like, if I could find something, I would push it to around 100 AD, but I can't do that.
Hmm.
But as far as like tattoos being here, it's we're so like just our culture is so intertwined with everything,
Yeah.
right? So we have our perceptions of things because our cultures are not separate. And that's like a beautiful thing about America, but it's also like a hard thing about America, right? We have this melting pot of ideas, this melting pot of different cultures who are coming together. And then so what happens with tattoos, a lot like the prohibition and grape juice, is we get to this point to where a certain subset of culture are getting tattoos.
Hmm.
All right. And they don't line up with what cultural Christianity is, or biblical Christianity is, or fundamentalist Christianity is.
Yeah.
So that becomes taboo,
Mm.
and it stays taboo because, again, like grape juice, prohibition has said it. We're
Hmm.
going to do it. And, so over time, we see that only people who are in jail have tattoos, sailors have tattoos, gang members have tattoos, bikers have tattoos, so on and so forth. Like it was solidified. This is when you think tattoos, these are the type of people you think about.
Mm.
Around the 90s, I would say, is when that started to change and people started to get tattoos, for their own personal aesthetic reasons.
Mm.
Um, and thank God the tribal art has died. But anyway, so we went from there, and then the church, again, being about 10 to 15 years behind what culture is doing and where culture is at, we start to allow these things back in,
Mm.
right? So tattoos become mainstream in culture, accepted in culture. Now tattoos are just an amazing form of art,
Hmm.
not just going in and picking out flash. Like there are legitimate, amazing tattoo artists that are doing some crazy things on the body,
Mm.
in image form. And now we've allowed that to be in the church. And now
Yeah.
it's almost to a point to where if you're going to get up on stage and be a mega church or be a non-denominational church, right, you've got to have a tattoo to have any sort of clout, right?
That's
Like
it.
he's got
At
that
least put a
tattooed
stick one
wrist,
on
dog.
or
Yeah.
something.
But my issue with that is I don't think it should be another tally mark
Yeah. Yeah.
for Christianity to be accepting what culture is doing, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't believe in that.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be something deeper. It needs to be something more meaningful because, again, your body is a temple.
That's right.
It is God's.
Yeah.
It is made in this image.
Yeah.
It is to be respected, to be cared for, to be loved, to be dignified. And if you're going to put something on your body, you better make it as awesome as possible,
Yeah.
or at
Right.
least try to tell the story, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, I mean, I was thinking it's a lot like, I mean, obviously tattoos are permanent on your body, but everybody dresses their body differently as
Mm-hmm.
well. Like the way you dress your temple, the way you dress your body is very unique to you. And I think that the same goes for tattoos. I mean, your tattoos are going to be very different than my tattoos, who are very different than my neighbor's tattoos. Like everybody's
Yeah.
tattoos tell a different story about them and about their journey and about their likes, their uniqueness, and their qualities and things like that. And I think all of that goes into our spiritual journey.
Well, and that's for me, what's really, really awesome about tattoos is
Hmm.
because as a viewer, and especially in today's art world, right? What are we postmodernist now? I don't know. Is it post,
Something
post,
like
post?
that.
Is it three post? Are we,
Triple post,
yeah, who knows, man?
whatever.
But everything in the art world is so subjective,
Yeah.
right? Like, so the artist creates something, but it's always subjective to the interpretation of the viewer.
Yeah.
That's not the case with tattoos.
Yeah.
I can't look at what's on your body and subjectively tell you how it makes me feel and why you got it.
Yeah.
Like that's not it. You can't do that.
Yeah. That's true.
Tattoos are supremely objective in their meaning, and you
Mhm.
have to have a conversation with the person who has them to figure out the why of why they have them. So for me, tattoos kind of like break down this barrier, even for art, about where we're going, but it also makes things that are typically subjective in nature, more objective in approach, but also relational too.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that's just so that we just need it, man. We need to build more bridges
Yeah.
and instead of making our own silos, and we're just at a weird spot in culture and in time. And if tattoos can be a conversation starter, then yes.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember having, I think it was, I don't remember if it was in church or where it was, but there was this guy, I think it was my old, not the church I pastored, but the church I used to attend. There was a guy there who was like super quiet, very reserved, very to himself, like like a tough nut to crack kind of a person. Like it just seemed like he was very standoffish, but he had all these tattoos. I remember I asked him one time, "That's a really cool tattoo on your arm. Like what's it about?" And he had this whole story behind the tattoo that he just opened up and he started talking about like his grandmother and about this thing and all this different stuff. And before you knew it, like this guy who I thought was very standoffish and very to himself and wasn't very approachable, became super approachable, super opened up, and we became kind of friends after that. And I think that's just a perfect example of that very thing is like you can have your tattoos. And I've seen so many people, even the barista at Starbucks, she got tattoos up her arm, and it's like, oh, those are really cool. Like they're a great way to get to know people and to
Yep.
converse with people and to break down those barriers, like you said. So you talk about in the book about how moving from this like rigid mindset to a more playful mindset and allowing ourselves to explore the beauty of Jesus, the beauty of Christ. In things like tattoos and how great insights can be discovered. So I thought that was a really great part of the book. And I was wondering if you could like maybe riff off of that idea a little bit of moving from a rigid to a playful thinking regarding God. Like, what does that look like? Just not even just tattoos, but even just other things in the
Well, I
world
think
outside of the church.
when it comes to theological concepts,
Hmm.
we've I hate systematic theology,
Me too.
right? Like it's just
Wayne
like
Grudo.
we've tried to systematize a God who has no system.
Hmm.
Um, but whenever we look at the gospel and we try to explain things like redemption, or we try to explain things like the restoration of all things, or salvation and
Yeah.
what that looks like, or the cross and the different theological motifs that come out of that, like how do you express that artistically? Well, I don't, it's hard.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you come into it with a creative mindset, like I'm just going to play around with this,
Hmm.
right? And understand that you have the grace to do that. Like you're not throwing shade on God. You're not committing the ultimate blasphemy. You're not doing these things. God has literally invited you in to investigate, and to play a role in this story that's being told from beginning to end, and it's wrapped up in Christ. So He's allowing you this creative freedom to almost express that, and
Hmm.
almost kind of dive in, and like it is almost like you look at the artwork and how does this make you feel, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's giving you the freedom to play with different things, to play with ideas, to play with metaphor, to
Hmm.
play with story, to play with different mediums, to play with all of these things. And we become so rigid because it's one of those things where we look at the cross and we say, well, we can't mess around with what the salvation means.
Hmm.
And I don't disagree with that, but we can mess around with how we communicate it.
Yeah.
We can mess around with how we tell the story. We can mess around with metaphors. We can mess around with all of these things. Like Jesus in scripture messes around with metaphors and parables all the time,
Yeah.
right? And there's such like almost a liberation of thought if you're able to learn to play with God, right? And to play with salvation, and to play with redemption, and to play with restoration.
Mm.
It doesn't become this thing of rigidity. It becomes this beautiful almost dance and waltz that you get to do. But if you can take it back to creation, right? So let's go back to scripture. And one of the first things we see God doing is playing in dirt,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Like for some reason we've made up this weird romantic idea that God's down there, and he's formed. But even then, if he is like a potter on the wheel, he is still legitimately having fun.
Mm.
There is something creative and expressive of, like, the whole creation story is all about God's curiosity and creative nature
Yeah.
and how he does things.
Yeah.
And even how he's curious about how Adam names the animals. And then you get to Genesis 2 something, 9 maybe, I don't know, that he made trees that are just good to look at,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
we miss that because we want to be so rigid about other things when
Mm,
God has literally invited us into this playful relationship, this give and take. And I think that's just so important to just capture back. And if we can do it with tattoos, cool. If we can do it with art, awesome. Let's do it. Let's just have fun though. We
mm,
we become so rigid as the church, big C, that we've almost forgot what it's like to be involved in intimacy with someone.
yeah,
My marriage doesn't work if me and my wife don't play together,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
my kids' relationship with me is not going to be healthy if we don't play together.
yeah,
And we have to look at our intimacy with God in the same way. Like if I'm not willing to play with God, then I'm going to miss out on some of the more intimate things that he could show me spiritually.
yeah.
And
Huh,
it's just kind of this thing where I really believe we should get back to
yeah.
and not feel so weird about it. Like people get so weirded out about playing.
Right.
It's it's crazy.
It's true. It's
Like
true.
you lose your childishness. Like just because I'm a doctor, I'm no longer allowed to have jokes.
Right. I want to be
No,
very serious on my podcast. No, no laughing.
gotta write my academic articles and
That's right.
use
That's
big
right.
words.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day because my daughter, like I said before, she's 7, and I was thinking about this idea of playing with God and playing with my faith in regards to like the Bible, like playing with the stories of the Bible because like at night she'll always ask me to tell her a Bible story when we're laying in bed. And so I told her the most recently about Jesus walking on the water. And when we got to the end of the story, she said to me, "So can I go walk on the water?" And like, is that even possible? I don't know. I was like, what do you think? She goes, I don't think so. She goes, but it's in the Bible, so it must have really happened. I was like, do you think so? She goes, I don't really know. She said, I don't know if I really believe that. And I said, well, that's okay. I said, but I said, I think that the writers of the Bible, I said, I think they were telling stories, whether they were really happened or not, to talk about like a deeper truth. And so, what do you mean? I said, well, I said, do you think it's really hard to walk on the water? Do you think it was really hard for Peter to walk on the water? She's like, yeah, I think it's like almost impossible. I said, yeah. But I said, in the story, he did it, right? She goes, yeah. I said, but what happened when he took his eyes off of Jesus? So, well, he started to sink and he started to like get consumed by the waves. I'm like, yeah, exactly. I said, so maybe the idea is like, do you have hard things in your life? She goes, yeah. Well, like when I started second grade, it was hard to go into my first day because it was a new classroom and all these different things. I said, yeah. I said, but when you keep your eyes focused on Jesus and, love and joy and peace and all these things that come from Jesus and come from God. I said, it's easier to kind of make your way through the day. I said, but when you take your eyes off of those things, you start focusing on how nervous you are, how scared you are, how new everything is, you start to sink, right? She's like, yeah. I said, I think maybe that's the point of the story, not so much about whether or not they really walked on the water. She's like, oh, do you think there are like other stories in the Bible are like that? So I was like, yeah. So now we have this thing where like I tell her a story from the Bible, and then we try to think about what the deeper meaning of the story is. And it's opened up so many unique conversations with her, whereas wouldn't have had those conversations if it was just a rigid story of, yes, Jesus walked on the water, yes, Peter
Yeah.
got out, and that kind of thing. So it just opened up so much uniqueness in terms of our relationship, but also I think our own relationship with God. So
One that it builds so much more intimacy, right?
yeah,
Like if
yeah,
you're able to give yourself the same grace that God affords you,
yeah. That's right.
and it's a different level,
Yep,
like
yep,
those moments with our kids or something, bro, I will never give those up.
yeah,
Those are cherished things.
yeah.
Those are special. Those are holy things.
That's right.
Um, but they don't come if we're rigid,
That's right.
right?
That's
Well, I
right.
don't know if he did that. Well, he did it. Get over it, right?
That's
Come
right.
on.
Have more faith.
Have more faith. He did it. He did it. It's in the book.
That's right.
You get what I'm saying? And if we approach everything like that, and especially theological concepts that are, bro, we don't know anything about God,
Yeah.
right? We know Jesus is the full revelation of who God is.
Yeah.
Past that, everything else we're doing, we're just trying to figure out.
That's right.
And one day when we stand before him, I am fully convinced that he's going to say, you want to know? Like 96% of your theology was wrong.
Right.
I'm like, I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
I tried though.
That's right.
Nice to see you.
Right.
Right?
Can I stay? Right.
May I please come in?
That's right.
Um, and so it's just one of those things to where and I blame it on the internet, right? Like everybody has an opinion about something and everybody wants to be right. And again, it goes back to that confirmation bias thought.
Yeah,
But we've done this thing to where we're not willing to listen to the other side. We're not willing to have conversations. We immediately vilify and demonize, and uh, but that's to our own detriment because we lose relationship.
that's
And
right.
I'm not willing to lose a relationship with anyone because they disagree with me. That's stupid.
Yeah, that's right.
And for
Yeah,
people out there who feel like that, you're dumb.
I've been having a lot of conversations about that, especially like after election time and everything. And
Oh, that happened? Haven't heard.
Right, yeah, I live in North Carolina, so I live in the western part, which is, you said you were from the western part.
Yeah, Lake
We're
Lure
just,
area.
yeah, we're just outside of Charlotte in a place called Gastonia. But
Hey,
yeah, so there's a lot of, it's very Republican here, very far right. Just a lot of Donald Trump flags, all these different things. And so, after the election, a lot of people who, I'm friends with in the more progressive world were like, you've got to, yeah, we got to take a stand. We got to do all this stuff. We got to fight. We got to fight. We got to fight back. We got to push back against all these people. I started to have this real like check in my spirit of like, you know, like, is this the best response to have? Because I remember being on the right. I used to be a fundamentalist, evangelical, far right. I was very angry all the time, lots of this negative energy. And then I became more progressive and on the left, and I felt like I still brought that same energy with me because I just directed it somewhere else. So now
yeah,
I'm feeling like there has to be like a different way to be and to exist. And my daughter, again, always teaching me something, came home from school and she's like, I had one friend who said that if Donald Trump wins the election, everything's gonna be really bad, and she hates Joe Biden and hates Kamala Harris. But my other friend said that if the other side wins, things are really bad, and she hates Donald Trump. She's like, I don't know. Both my friends say different things. I don't know what to think. And I'm like, man, like this is just there's so much division. And I said to her, I said, you know what? Like whoever wins the election, we still need to live with our neighbors. Like the people down the street who have the Trump flags, they're still going to be
mhm.
there. People on the other side who have the Harris stuff, they're still going to be there. And whoever's going to be in the White House will be in the White House. And I said, I think maybe a better approach for us is to ask some questions. Like I said, for me, I said in my world with my podcast and things I'm doing, I'm finding it important to ask to be more curious as opposed to
Yep.
judgmental and say, man, like I see that entirely differently. Can you help me understand why you're so passionate about this particular candidate, this particular thing, when this is like what I see? Help me understand that. So like that has led, it's a harder conversation to have because you have to actually engage in a relationship. But I
Yeah.
feel like it's led to such deeper places being more curious. And that allows that relationship to kind of keep going as opposed to be cut off. So as you were
What is
talking
it that
about that
Jesus
creativity,
said?
that's what I was thinking.
What is it that Jesus said though? He looked on the crowd and had compassion because they were
Yeah,
like sheep without a
that's right.
shepherd.
That's right.
Like identity politics is one of the worst things that's ever happened to
Yeah.
America.
Yeah.
I think it started happening around the 70s, 80s. But now it's like your sexual orientation, your politics, like all of these things that shouldn't define who you are as a human being start to define you.
That's right.
And you know, whatever. Like I get so sick of it, but at the same time, like I understand, like I have to have compassion.
Yep.
I gotta engage in the tough conversations with people I disagree with, you know, just to find common ground.
Yep.
Like and just say, look, we don't agree on a lot of. You're not supposed to,
That's right.
right? Like, dear
Not
Lord, if
robots.
everything was all vanilla, we wouldn't have Rocky Road ice cream, and I would be sad.
That's right.
So we have like you're supposed to disagree. You're
Yeah.
supposed to form your own opinions. You're
Yep.
supposed to like have your own thoughts and your own like please.
Yep.
But don't vilify the other side because they don't believe the same way you do. Like
Yep.
that's literally what leads to dehumanizing the other. And when you start dehumanizing people, there's no end to the list of atrocities that you can commit.
That's right.
And we've got to stop before we get there. And for some people, they're already there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's both sides.
Yeah. That's true. Like I said, I feel like I'm in this place where I don't want to become the energy that I left behind. And I felt like I
Yeah.
noticed myself really going in that direction. And especially as this election started to heat up, and I was like, man, I just gotta take a step back. And I need to like really analyze what's going on inside of me so I could
Yeah.
be a better presence, in my community, and in the online world and different things like that. So,
Do you know
and
what no man's land is?
no.
So in World War II, or World War One, they would dig these trenches, right?
Hmm.
And this is before like modern warfare came in, and so in the space in between was called no man's land. You
Yep.
didn't go there because if you went there, you're shot on either
Mm,
side. And I read a book by a guy, I don't remember the name, but it's called Walking in No Man's Land. And it's this whole idea that with the way things are in culture and society and how we exist as
yeah.
Christians, like we're not walking the edge of the coin because we're still in the coin. But what we do is really, and what we're called to do is walk on no man's land. And that means that you're going to get shot from either side,
That's right.
right? You're going to catch it, but that's where we're supposed to be
That's good.
because walking there bridges that gap between the two.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like my whole philosophy on all that. And I try to teach my kid to say no king but Christ, and be a little Christian anarchist, and do stuff like that just to get him in trouble.
There you go. That'll do
Yeah.
it. That'll do it. Awesome. Well, Justin, we're just about out of time, but this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for your time, for your work. I appreciate you.
Yes, sir. I appreciate you. Thanks for having me on, man. It was a ton of
Definitely.
fun, and I hope I can purchase one of your artworks soon.
Yeah.
I got my eye on that Calvin and Hobbes, man.
There you go. Well, I
Yeah.
can keep it aside for you.
All right. Thanks, bro.
And real quick, where can people find you online if they want to interact more with you, your work?
I'm on Facebook. You can send me a message. I'm on Instagram. I think it's J Scoggins 7. Same thing on Facebook. I've got my own little blog that I do not keep up with, but my editor and friend keeps yelling at me to write more, so I will be writing more.
There you go.
It's called idocristos.com. And then yeah, just hit me up, man. I'm always down to chat.
Awesome. I'll put the links in the show notes and we'll do it again.
All right, man.
Thanks, my
Good to
friend.
see ya.